We are still in 1 Kings 17, believe it or not.
Too
I
much.
know you believe it, because you can go away on vacation, come back, and we're still in 1 Kings 17. In fact, you can go to Arizona for the winter and come back and have missed a thing, right, Laura?
The first 5 minutes, you just review the content.
That's right. So, we do need to get up to speed just a little bit, as you expected, on where we are, just so you all have your minds in the setting and all as we try to get into it, because we have maps and pictures this year, or this time. Anyway, so here's our map, and if you can sort out the colors there a little bit, the Kingdom of Israel is kind of the dark green, and drifts down there towards Moab, which actually at one time while they didn't actually control it, Moab paid due diligence to Judah, and they were sort of under Israel's thumb for a short period of time, the northern kingdom, before the big revolt. And if you looked up the Moabite stone on your internet after we had it up here a few days ago, it's the leader of Moab as he rejoices and exalts, thank you, over his victory over Israel and throwing them out, basically. So this piece down here, they had some influence in spite. So then we have Judah down here, who for the moment is going to be kind of silent. We're focused away from Judah and more up here. And we are particular in Samaria, which I think is that. Oh my, watch me follow the step. That'll be it. Yeah. I can't see it. I'm standing right in front of it. I think it's this. Whoops, there we go. Samaria. That's the one. And I learned a really interesting piece of history about Samaria. We talked about how Omri came and built that city. And before that, they'd had their capital further over next to the Jordan in a very fertile area, beautiful, known for its gardens and all this sort of thing. And all of a sudden, this guy leaves this beautiful place and packs up, goes out in the middle of the desert and buys this spot. And the question in my mind was, what was it that triggered that? And in some of my reading and some of the archaeological type stuff that was going on and tracking those things, what you find out is one of his neighbors, who he was very nervous about, way over here, had finally got strong enough they were flexing their muscles. These people over in Assyria. And it had been some time as they built their government, they built their system of running their government and built up their military, and they were finally ready to try to test that. And there are records of the king up there deciding that he is going to make a thrust towards the Mediterranean, because they're wanting to, their goal, of course, do we have the bigger map that shows Assyria and everything? Do you have a copy of that? We've talked about the Fertile Crescent and the connection and everything, and you've got to realize that someone over there on the Tigris-Euphrates that wants to conquer the world needs a connection to Europe, and they need a connection to Africa, to Egypt. And this is it, right here. And their first shot at that is to take a run across straight, more or less straight west, which is north of Israel. But they made a shot through Phoenicia, made some major attacks and some runs over there. And the king of Israel went, oh my gosh, we need to be a whole lot more better prepared to defend the city than in this beautiful spot we're in. And he went out and he bought that spot right there, the hill of Samar, which sits in a bowl. And I'm not sure if we still have our photos of it, but you may remember it sits up on a hump in the middle of kind of a fertile basin. Has a spring there, which is perfect if you're trying to defend the city. And on one side is a semicircle of mountains, so you can see anybody coming. On the other side from that knob, I'm told, you can see the Mediterranean. So you have a view out towards the sea. You have a back wall, if you will, around it. and a real fortress that they built. Here's the center of it is here. You can see it sits in a little bit of a bowl, but particularly as you've got some mountains on this edge here, but you're open that way. You see the farmland and everything. It's less steep over here, and you can see westward to the sea. And right in the middle of that, they have excavated those ruins, and sure enough, there's virgin soil under the rocks that Omri laid. And it's also interesting, their technology, by the time they built this, compared to earlier cities, was much more advanced. Big, solid, square blocks, hewn, not just the combination of hewn and piled boulders that they've seen in other walls, 15, 16 feet thick, and designed to hold off the Assyrians, which they did for a time.
Back in the day, I learned that a successful civilization needed water and fertile ground. I don't see, they don't have access to major waterway, do they?
There's a spring right there.
The boats can go up and down for trade?
No, not for trade, but this whole area is, he's off the beaten path a little bit, but it's very defensible. You can see, this is modern day today, you can see the farm ground here that's around that. And the main trade route is north-south here.
Is that sand or rock?
This here, this is rock.
It's all rock.
This is, you've seen the rocky, craggy, rough
It just seems
mountains.
like an unlikely place.
It was defensible, highly
That's all they
defensible.
cared about.
You've got to have a city that can stand. Yeah, see
Is
that?
Looking from the bowl up?
You can see them coming, and it's going to be tough going. It's going to be tough sledding. You've only got one way in that's easy. It's from the west. It's not from the north or the east, and the enemy was north and east. So, and you,
Trade route.
a major trade route goes up and down the coast. So what the enemy's looking for is control of the trade. They're looking for access to Egypt. If you want to conquer Egypt, you have to have this chunk of real estate called Israel. It's what you got to have. And it was their first thrust that went across north of them through Phoenicia that got Omri excited about, we've got to build more. It really appears that's what it is. Because the timing, when he built that city, and the timing of those attacks that the Assyrians were starting to do was what really came together there. So we've had this place, and they are settled there. The only one problem is, you mentioned agriculture is absolutely critical. So what's really important to these people are the spring and fall rains, especially the fall and winter rains, but also you've read about, we probably talked about the earlier and latter rains. They have stopped, and there's archaeological evidence that speaks to that period when those rains came to a halt and everything's drying up. If you don't have the rains, you don't have anything. And this last time we looked at the guy who's, yes?
Is it fertile ground around there for,
In this piece here, yeah, around Samaria there actually is to the west, and in a bowl around the city there's some pretty fertile ground. So they have a place to grow stuff for that city, as well as things going through from the rest of the land. So I don't know if that one shows it a little better. You can see the hill of Samar. Right here's the hill, and down in here you can see there's farm ground around that today. So we have this place, and last time we saw the shift from looking at the kings to suddenly looking at God's prophet Elijah. And he just appears on the scene, kaboom. We know very little about him, but he suddenly shows up. We know that he was from Tishbe, and people are all over the map, literally, about where Tishbe is. Some say, as this particular one is, that Tishbe is somewhere on the east side of the Jordan. The reason they say that is because in the translation they argue about the Hebrew, whether it says he is from in the Tishbe in Gilead, or whether he is the Tishbite who happens to be of the settlers in Gilead. So some say, no, Tishbe was somewhere over here, and he was of the settlers of Gilead, which is over here on the east side of the Jordan. but were forced there by the civil wars between the north and the south, if you will, between Israel and Judah. And in some of those battles, people were forced over here, and he was a settler, a refugee, if you will, in a very rugged piece of country. So he shows up all of a sudden. We don't know exactly where from, but he is already God's prophet. We don't know how he came to be that way, but he's just boom there, which is really interesting. And the first time we see him, he is standing before Ahab, which is also interesting. How does a settler from way over there, who's a rough-looking character, as you can see these portrayals that Kathy's come up with on the internet, as these folks have gone and acted out some of these scenes, and they show him as a pretty rugged character, probably not too far wrong. And he has access to the king, in which he announces the fact that there's going to be no rain until he has the say-so. So you hear from me. And just as quickly he vanishes from the scene as far as Ahab is concerned. And at first I'm sure they thought nothing of it until things start drying up, the pastures start drying up, and they start losing cattle, they start losing their olive groves and their grape vineyards. The plants are dying, they're not recoverable. Things are getting tough. And we saw last time that Ahab is looking for this guy. He is searching for him. God has taken him, interestingly enough, and hid him out by the brook Cherith, or Cherith, depending on how your English translates that, which is in the middle of nowhere, somewhere off of the Jordan. And here is what it might very well have looked like. Some very rugged, rocky country with a stream of some type running through it. And he is out there for, we're not sure how long, could have been close to a year that he is out there, fed by the ravens, which we talked about last time is really unusual. And I've picked up a few more things that they've mentioned about ravens. One is that circling ravens wouldn't draw a lot of attention from anyone to come see what was going on, because circling ravens would be looking for something dead. And when things are in a drought and a bunch of ravens are circling up in a draw somewhere, you would go, well, there's another dead something. No particular reason to go search that place out. And so there's some logic in that. The problem being that ravens are unclean, and they eat food that's unclean, and to touch an unclean thing is taboo for a Jew. And I still have yet to find a commentator that will directly address that issue and what God was trying to tell him, except maybe he was trying to show that his work can be done with whoever he chooses and not necessarily with the Jewish nation alone. And so he's looking for those who will do his commands. It is interesting, one person brought up the fact that he was fed two things. Do you remember what they were? In the morning and the evening.
Bread and meat.
Bread and meat. And I never thought about it until I think it was Enadina showed me a commentary she had in her Bible. And they said meat is interesting because the poor of Israel probably would not have had meat very often. Very rarely. Maybe special occasion. Couldn't refrigerate it, so it had to be slaughtered every day, and you just couldn't afford to slaughter every day and have this big feast. Only the wealthy would be having meat twice a day of their meals. So here in the midst of a drought where people were going probably without much meat, even at the king's table things might have been tough, God's feeding his guy in the wilderness with king's food. The very best for his prophet. Really interesting thought. Yeah, where they cooked. I don't know where they got it. One commentator suggests that since, and maybe he was alluding to this idea, that perhaps it came off the king's table itself. So who knows?
Jezebel's table.
Yeah, Jezebel's table. You wonder. You know, she would have had meat.
The
So-
fact is that the bird was in the palace.
Yeah. Found its way in. Yeah, I know, there's all kinds of crazy things you can, which really don't get us anywhere. But so we see him now. Last time we ended up with him there at the brook. He'd been there quite a while, and the brook dries up. And the first thing you think of, I don't know about you, but the first thing I think of is, well, God brought him out here, stuck him out there, and then his brook dries up. Well, what a bum deal is that? Can you imagine every day as it gets less and less and less? And he's going, God, you told me to be here, and the brook's drying up. And you remember that we said that sometimes the brook drying up and those difficult times are not a sign that you're out of God's will and that this is punishment, but it's actually a sign that you are right exactly where God wants you, because the brook drying up is a natural result of what he prophesied. He said, it will not rain, and the brook getting less and less and less is God's way of saying to him, I'm doing what I said I would do. Every day he's got a reminder through the ravens. Every day he's got a reminder through watching that brook slowly get smaller and smaller and smaller that God is doing what he said he would do.
Not only that though, he was waiting for God's instructions daily.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the day that it dries up, that's when God then reveals what the next step is.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think, you know, we do so much work in planning ahead.
Yeah.
And yet we're constantly reminded to think of God daily.
Wait. And I love the way God answers, because you have just brought us right to where, thank you. That is the segue I needed to bring him to the next point in verse 8. And so let's read on how God suddenly answers that. And you've got to listen to this answer and think about this answer that God gives him. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. All right, what an answer! Aren't you excited? After being all that whole year with no people, I get to go where there's people. Does anybody know where that is? Have we got a map? Here is one possible way to get there. It was probably the wisest way to get there if he actually took it, if indeed he is over here somewhere. It's either that or he's got to go up through here and up this way. But there's two problems with this. You're hidden away nicely here, and you have to go out. This is still a freeway. That is the Interstate 90 of that time. Maybe the Interstate 5, it's going north and south. What's the problem with that? Who's looking for him? Ahab. Do you remember how severely he was looking for him? Let's look back up there again. If we go to chapter 18, it's Obadiah's concern about showing up in verse 10. As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master is not sent to search for you. And when they said, he's not here, he made the kingdom or nation swear that they could not find you. And if I go and I report to him that you're here and you aren't here when he gets back, it's for me. Because he is upset and he's looking for you. So Ahab is looking for him. So to be out on the road is risky business. But then you get to go to this wonderful resort town on the Mediterranean coast. Right up here, it's more or less midway between Tyre and Sidon. Ring any bells, Tyre and Sidon? Where is that? Is it in Israel? Not in Israel. It's in Phoenicia. Who's from Phoenicia that we know? Nice young lady.
The queen.
The queen, Jezebel, is from Phoenicia. Her father there, remember, is this real sweet guy that she learned so well from. Her father is not only the king of Phoenicia, he is the high priest of Baal in that country. And he is the one who killed his brother in order to take over the kingdom. So he's really a generous, loving, wonderful guy. So you take your risk of traveling through here to end up in a city up here, the name of which means the smelter or testing place. So it was either a town that smelted metal or refined or did something, but God says to, hey, you think about this, I'm out there and my brook's drying up, and he says, I want you to do something. I want you to go through Ahab's territory, expose yourself on the main freeway, where everybody's looking for you, including the leaders of every foreign country that Ahab has put the leverage to. And I want you to go up into Jezebel's home country, and I want you to go to a place that is a place of testing. And if that weren't good enough, I'm going to have you go there. And there's a widow, just like I commanded the ravens, I've commanded a widow to take care of you. And you go, oh, isn't that great? It's got a lady who's been widowed. She has got a husband, so you can help her haul wood, and she can help take care of you. Isn't that a wonderful thing? What's the problem with that idea? Women had nothing when they were widowed if their husbands weren't wealthy. And if they didn't have someone to take care of them, that was a serious problem to be a widow in those days.
Also, you have the problem of a Jewish man and a pagan woman.
Oh my gosh, she's a Gentile. She's not a Jew. The Lord used that in Luke chapter 4 in his hometown and mentioned that, and it made everybody so excited to have him bring that up that they took him out on a cliff and tried to throw him off in his own hometown. This was a hot deal, a hot button issue to have a Gentile widow. So here you have it, your thing's dried up, and finally God speaks to you. You've been waiting to hear what he has to say. And he says, you go from the fire into the frying pan, go through territory where you're hunted, go to a place where there's the center of Baal worship, where Jezebel's hometown is, and you trust me that I'm going to take care of you with a widow.
It's another picture of the unclean who's going to take care of it.
You taught that. Yeah, it almost makes you wonder if the ravens were getting him ready for the idea that this Gentile woman was going to take care of him. And he says, his answer is, verse 10, I love this guy. I'm amazed by him because I'm not sure that I would have done that. So he arose. God said, arise and go. So he arose and he went to Zarephath. And he makes it all the way there. He had to be praising God that he made it all the way to the gates of the city. Everything was okay. Nobody identified him. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And there's our widow gathering sticks out there, gathering up a few little, and sticks meaning, and we're not talking about big firewood, we're talking about a little handful of twigs. And he called to her, and as a testing question, I guess, in a way, please get me a little water in a jar that I may drink. And you got to think about that. What's going on? A drought. And we have archaeological evidence that indeed the drought had gone to Phoenicia. And there are some writings where they record how bad it was getting because the fall rains had failed and things were tough in Phoenicia as well as Israel. That whole area was in a drought. And this widow woman is out there gathering a few twigs and he wants water. Hopefully there's a spring in town. I guess there's a whole Mediterranean if you like salt in your water. And then as she's going to get it, which is amazing, he goes, oh, this must be the woman because she's going to get it. And he calls after her and he says, please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. Would you bring me a little something to eat? And here's her answer. There's a plus and a real unsettling part for him, I think. The first part is, she says, as the Lord your God lives. That's interesting. She recognizes him as a Jew. And also, notice that she is using that term. When they use that term, what does it mean? As the Lord your God lives. She recognizes that his God lives. She's a believer. Somehow, the message Because the God of Israel has gotten all the way to Zarephath, and this woman has heard it. As the Lord your God lives, here's the good news. I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar, and behold, I am gathering a few sticks that I may go in and prepare for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. It's her last meal. I have come all the way to Zarephath for this widow to care for me. I've trusted God for that, and I get there and find her, and she's got nothing. A little dab of meal in the bottom of a jar, and a little dab of oil, and they're going to eat it. It's their last meal. They don't have anything else. And it'd be real easy for us to put ourselves in Elijah's place and go, oh, I'm sorry, must be the wrong person. I must be confused. Let it go. I'll find the wealthy widow or whoever that's supposed to take care of me. But then his faith is amazing. Elijah said to her, do not fear, go and do as you have said, which is make the last little cake. But make me a little bread cake from it first, and bring it out to me, and afterwards you may make one for yourself and for your son. And she's got to be going, wait a minute, do the math.
Every time I read that, I cannot get over my bed attitude. The audacity of him.
Yeah, bring me one first.
Bring me one first. I mean, if I were in her place.
Remember the city of tested. He was testing her to see if it was right.
Yeah, he was being tested also.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that his test for him is also a test for her, and the ministry that God does for him is also, you're going to see more and more, it goes both ways. Her faith is going to strengthen his faith will strengthen her, and it's a mutual thing. It's not just one, the great prophet, coming to teach, but God uses this Gentile widow woman to teach him lessons back. And he's going to need them. It's these small tests of life that God's going to use to strengthen him, to prepare him for what's coming. And it's passing these little ones that really is important. And often we want to, oh man, we're going to be ready for that. You know, I know if they came tomorrow and the soldiers marched up to my door and said, you know, are you a Christian or not a Christian? You know, and if you're not, if you stand, well, you go to jail, we take your land. Oh man, I stand for the Lord. You know, you kind of get your mind, oh, this big thing. And then one little test comes along and you cave. Some little thing. And so that's the key he's getting us. It's the little stuff that's going to prepare him for the big stuff. You'll never make the big stuff if you don't get through the little ones. So he tells her that do not fear. Boy, we've seen that all the way through the Old Testament study here, haven't we? Do not fear. Go and do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake first, and bring it out to me, and afterwards you may make one for yourself and your son. For, here's why, thus says the Lord God of Israel, the one you just spoke of, the bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor the jar of oil be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth. And boy, just like when the word came to him out there by the creek, so she went and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord which he spoke to Elijah. Wow, neat story, huh? And you know, she had a barrel in there of flour, probably this big, around that tall, right? The description here, from what I've seen from my commentators, since I don't know sickum about Hebrew other than it looks funny, and it goes backwards, and there are no spaces, and it's really confusing, is that this is a small jar that they would have had in the household, and a small pitcher, because we're talking about a widow woman with very little resources. So she wouldn't have bought more than maybe one day's meal ahead of time. So you get the picture. Every day you have, when you open that lid, it's the same test over and over and over every day. You're going to open that lid, is it going to be there? Are you expecting that it will be there? What's your confidence that it will be there?
It brings a lot of interesting things to mind about how does she explain this to the neighbors? They're probably all suffering too, and here she's eating right along and
Yeah.
shows no sign of going out
How is it?
and getting anything.
Yeah, how is it that you, and you've got this guy that living on your roof?
Yeah.
He's got the apartment upstairs, would have been reached by an outdoor staircase. He's up there, she's feeding him, and every day they eat. You have to wonder what the neighbors are thinking. Yeah, so household, so did she have other family, or maybe she took care of others as the things got worse in the family, she had food? Boy, if you're in the Philippines, you had a half a bowl of rice, everybody that doesn't comes to your house. Might have been the same.
And you mentioned Philippines, you talk about sticks. I went into a home one night and a lady was building a fire and she had sticks,
Little
smaller
sticks.
than my finger, and she had a little tiny fire. She had a dirt wall and she dug out a little hole about this big in her dirt wall and put these sticks, little twigs, that's a better word, little tiny twigs, and put that in there, and that was what she cooked with. You know, we're thinking fire, and she had,
Teeny tiny fire.
like the fires we saw where they put them in, they had the cinder block, and they cut out half of the cinder block, and that empty in the cinder block was their oven.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, a little spot. So you gotta think small. So interesting time as she's there, and we get down to the end, of course, and it's a fun story. I mean, everybody loves to hear the story. Oh, wow, isn't that neat? Our God took care of them and all that sort of thing. And then you get pushed, comes to shove. You got to go, so what? What difference does it make to us in 2012 what happened with Elijah? I mean, he's a prophet, for heaven's sakes. He's one of these famous guys. He's the one that shows up with Jesus, and he's the one that's going to, you know, he's one of the greatest prophets ever. Of course great stuff happened to him. What difference does that make for us today? The first question by way of application I'd like to run by you is, when you think about him standing there by that dried up brook that day, when the last little bit of moisture, if you find yourself someday standing by a dried up brook, are you in a spiritual condition where you can hear God's instructions? If God were to come to you and say, hey Ron, I need you. I need you to go somewhere. Would you hear? And how do I make sure that I am able to hear? Well, do I just sit around and meditate and hum? How do we know what God thinks and what He says is important? And how do we position our lives to know when He's going to say something? What instructions do we have that tells us how to do that? I suspect that if Elijah had access to any kind of scrolls or scriptures, as God's prophet, he would have had some training somewhere, that's something he took along with him. I don't think he just sat out there and contemplated infinity all day. I suspect that he was going back over the old scrolls and the law and the Torah to see what God had said.
Most of us would say, God, you know that you're in control of everything, and this is your fault, and we'd be mad at God.
Be mad to drying this brook up. What did you thinking? So you got to have your mind in the right, or you're mad at God because your last little trickle is gone.
And that is sitting out there for a year with nothing.
With nothing. Yeah. Just waiting. Don't you love waiting?
I can't help thinking that when he was living with the widow, kept wishing some ravens and
Yeah, yeah, you know, get just a little meat, we're getting tired of this gruel.
God's provision isn't always like we expect or.
Yeah. Yeah, do you trust him one day at a time, one raven delivery at a time? You know, are they gonna come tomorrow morning? Are they gonna come tomorrow afternoon? When you open the jar, when she opened that jar in the morning, was she opening up expecting it was just gonna be there? Or was she going, I wonder, it's been there again. Still there. Question. What are you facing in your life right now that needs God's supply? Is there anything you're facing that's bigger than anything that you can do anything about? You know, all of us will find something like that sometime in our life, but a lot of times, as I look back and I'm looking at me, and yeah, there's always things going on, but it's real easy to kind of keep them covered. I think I got, it's like you've seen the picture of the cat trying to hold down all the little things, you know, you got your paws all full and your mouth's got a hole. Have you seen that picture? I don't know, it's got mice or just totally, you think you got it, boy, I got it covered. You know, I'll just keep shuffling around, I can cover all that stuff, and then God someday will throw something at you and your brook will dry up. You have just no way you're going to cover that. Have you recognized that those other things you really can't cover? We think that we can cover them. Have you ever really looked at them hard and said, you know, God, I really should be trusting you for that. I shouldn't be confident in myself. So the question is, are we ready to trust him? Are we willing to trust him to meet that need? And then questions that related to what you have asked, where is our focus? Are we focused on the problem, or are we focused on the God who has placed us here with the problem and with his answers, and we're ready to hear? What are we looking at? And I was trying to think about myself, and I can remember a time when I had a really, really frustrating time early coming back to the farm, and my folks were gone, and that seeding in the fall was left to me, and I was having no end of disastrous trouble. And it was just all day long, and you got 5 acres done, and the machinery was broken, and things were plugged up, and you were so tired and so frustrated, I had to walk home because I was clear at the far end of the field. I remember stomping up through the field, and I distinctly remember saying, "What have I done to deserve this?" And I look back now and go, that was stupid. It's like, what I had done to deserve not going sit, and that was it, you know. The fact that I'm alive, that I had an opportunity to make a living doing something I love. And I mean, you could put a whole bunch of stuff in there, but my focus is on, oh, how poor me. So the question is, what's my focus? Is it on God? Is it on what he's wanting to do in this world? As Elijah had to realize there's a bigger agenda than just him. And he was waiting for that to take place. Does your present condition look impossible? Does it look like there is no way God can meet your needs through what he has brought about into your life? Boy, that's an interesting question. These aren't mine, by the way. I borrowed them.
I was just thinking what's even harder is when you get to that point where you realize that you may just be sitting there trying to come up with an answer to the problem, or trying to solve the problem, and maybe the problem shouldn't be solved. Maybe that bill won't get paid, and maybe you'll lose everything, and maybe all that will happen, but that he still is sovereign, and he is still in control, and that's what's really difficult, is when you don't sit there going, well, see,
He didn't do it my way.
He didn't do it. So
He didn't do it the way the world says. He didn't do it what we expected.
You keep trying to stop this from happening, or maybe this is supposed to happen.
That's exactly what's supposed to happen. Yeah.
Habakkuk, he says, "Will the fig tree not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord."
Yeah. So those in the back, and here is a quote from Habakkuk that says, when there's no crops, when the figs have failed, and the grapes have failed, and this and that, and the sheep are all dead, and there's absolutely nothing out there because of the drought, yet will I trust him. And that's what we're talking about, is being able to look at your situation and say it's impossible, and you go, it is. It's impossible. There's nothing I can do about it.
Our faith is one day at a time.
One day at a time. Yeah.
And when we're there, that's when we find that God is sufficient.
He's sufficient to meet the need. And the last one, as we're coming down out of time, is you look at that widow in Zarephath and you look at the prophet. Have you ever considered, when you're in your jam, I don't know about you, I'm always struggling not to just look at the jam and look at the situation and look at the problem, at my problem or my dilemma. Have you ever considered what we just talked about, that either before or in the process of meeting the need that you have, he wants to use you to meet the need of someone else? As he met the need of this widow to survive, he's going to use her as the way to train his prophet to be ready for some really great things. Now, it's the idea when the prophet, someday they asked him, at the word ceremony, as you look back in your life, what do you owe all this to? And he can look back and say, there was a widow that taught me faith. She had nothing, she was getting ready to die, and I came and said, give me the last of your food, and God will take care of you. And she said, I'll do it. She's willing to put her son's life and her life in the hands of her God and say, I trust him, that he'll take care of me. And in that, trains the prophet to be ready to stand on top of Mount Carmel in front of all the prophets of Baal and say, bring her on, bring down the fire. It started way down here.
But also the last thing is, you gotta get to the point where you're praying for an answer to the problem, you recognize that that comes. I mean, come on, this guy walks up and down the skin, whatever, and look at like.
Yeah, this wild, crazy guy comes up and meets you out in front of the gate as you're gathering sticks, and you don't
That's
go,
the answer to her prayer.
It doesn't look like the answer I had in mind. Where's your knight in shining armor there?
It smells.
Yeah, he smells like he's just walked through the desert. Oh my goodness.
No water.
No water.
Shower.
Can't take a shower. Yeah, I didn't do that. Or he smelled like salt water and fish because he jumped in the Mediterranean. Yeah, yeah. God said, I've called, just like I have got the ravens, and the same terminology used for the widow of Zarephath as he did for the ravens. And you see that the widow absolutely wasn't, oh, you're the guy. But her heart was ready. He had prepared her. He had brought her to the place where she was ready. And we know that it's not in salvation that God is the one that gives us the faith. He says the faith, it's not ours. He says you by grace, and by your faith, and that not of yourselves, it's a gift of God. It's been given to you. So he prepared her, and he'll prepare us. And he's just asking for us to train our thoughts, to train our minds, to look at his word and be ready and waiting for him. And that's the hard part, to be ready and waiting and faithful and doing what he asked us to do, to have eyes and ears are ready to hear. Folks are backing up outside. I got to get going. Let's close. Father, we thank you for our time here together this morning. Pray that it might challenge us to look at our lives in a different way, that we would be open and ready and listening for your call, and that in impossible situations of life that we would recognize that that's where maybe you are the most active of all, that it is your hand that has placed us there in these impossible situations. It is your hand that will lead us through them, and that you often use those for more than just us, that you use them to impact others as we go through this life, because that's how you've chosen to act. We just give you thanks and give you praise that we can learn from your word and be prepared and be used by you. We pray that you would be glorified in our lives. We thank you in Jesus' name.